This is a piece of music to evoke a memory of the Nanjing Massacre. And so I'd like to, on behalf of the Hong Kong Holocaust and Tolerance Center, welcome students from ELSA High, the Jewish high school in Hong Kong. And my students, my 5 students, 4 of whom are present in Macao with me in the room, and one of whom, because of COVID restrictions, is currently stuck in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, but he's going to be very much part of this conversation. And the conversation today, which I really want to have between Chinese, Malaysian Chinese undergraduates and high school students at ELSA, is on Holocaust and genocide education. As I'm sure you're aware, this last month, April, has been Genocide Awareness Month, and this event now is to bring this month to a close. And of course, the genocide, which is paramount in popular memory, in everybody's, not everybody, that's a problem, but certainly in the West, everybody knows about the Holocaust. The Holocaust is this monumental event, civilizational shifting event. And myself and the Hong Kong Holocaust and Tolerance Center and others are in Hong Kong and elsewhere in Asia, trying to and wanting to teach about the Holocaust. But one of the questions we have to ask ourselves, and this is really what I want to begin the conversation with ELSA first, asking you, ELSA, why do you think we should teach the Holocaust in Asia? After all, the Holocaust, if you look at it objectively, was a European experience. It had very little impact on Asia directly. Why should people in Hong Kong and Macau and China and Malaysia and elsewhere learn about the Holocaust? I'm just curious if we get the conversation going with that question, please. Starting with
Yes, sure. So I think a key point to begin with is the fact that, as with any tragic event, no matter where we're from, it can definitely inform us about a lot of things and can teach us important lessons about how we should learn to act as individuals. And I think an example, it teaches us empathy as well. And I think that throughout life, we often draw on the lessons of history. So studying the Holocaust allows us to relate to other events that maybe even if we are non-Jews, that we can connect with. So I think it's important that regardless of who we are, we should all learn about these historical events, but should also focus on the lessons that we can learn from them.
Thanks, Dan. I'm going to ask you to develop that slightly. One of the difficulties, and I suppose the point of my question partly is the Holocaust, as I said, is a Western experience. And one of the ways we understand the causes of the Holocaust is obviously the long history of anti-Semitism in the West, in the long history of Christian anti-Semitism and all the other horrors that Jews have suffered for 2,000 years. I'm not for one moment saying Christianity caused the Holocaust, but I am saying, which I always say, it wouldn't have happened without the groundwork of some of the ideas which other religions allowed to foster and fester. Given that there's very little known about Jews in Asia, what are the challenges of teaching about the Holocaust in an environment where most people really know nothing about Jews? I mean, and I'd be interested to have you say something about your experience as Jews in Hong Kong. How do you, when you tell people you're Jewish, what is their reaction? And how do we can we teach the Holocaust without people knowing Jewish history, I suppose is my point.
Sure. I think it presents a challenge to learn about the history of a group of people that you may not have met. But I also think that In learning about this history, it allows you to draw a deeper connection if and when you do meet people that are affected by these tragedies. But I think that from my own experience, I've been very lucky in Hong Kong, and I think we have a very multicultural and open society that is very accepting in a lot of ways. And I think that I've struggled sometimes to learn about histories of cultures and of people that I myself haven't met. But at a later point, when I have met these people who've suffered from these kind of tragedies, it's been a point that I could connect with them with, and it allows me to have a deeper understanding of them as people.
Anybody, thanks, Dan. Anybody else at ELSA at this point want to say anything before we move on to give the floor to Macao on that question? Anybody at ELSA?
I think while obviously it has heavily affected Jewish history in specific, it also affected the world globally. So just to learn about something like this, we can see how that already affected the future, and we need to learn about it to make it not happen again due to the severity of the situation.
Okay, I'll come back to some of the points there, but I'm going to just for the moment ask the Macao students, starting those in the room. Anybody want to say something? Quick, time is fleeting. Lenny? Clamola? Switch your microphone on. All right.
Yeah, about the Holocaust in Asia, because I'm from mainland China, and in my education, I did not learn something about Jewish history, but I also learned something about Holocaust by war and violence. So I'd like to ask, how do you consider the Holocaust in Jew history? Well, I mean, because I'm not a Jew, so I was wondering about this.
What Clamola's asking is, as somebody from mainland China, he's learning about the Holocaust, but he doesn't really understand its place in Jewish history. Can you just say something briefly about its position in Jewish history? Elsa.
The Holocaust was a devastating point in Jewish history. It's also more modern. Like when we were in classes that we studied, we look at everything from the Crusades all the way to the Holocaust. So it has a very significant point, as it's kind of the culmination of all the anti-Semitism that has been festering in Europe at the time.
Sure, and I suppose it is, and the important thing, it's actually living history. I'm sure some of you may be grandchildren of survivors, and I'm sure you all have met survivors.
And to elaborate on that, as a young person, I definitely think that the Holocaust has a significant bearing on me in the sense that when I visit Israel, part of the reason that the state is as strong as it is today is because we have these deeply ingrained memories of the tragedies that we experienced. And that kind of inspires Jewish people to be a strong nation and to be proud of being Jewish. And I think that that's one of the important things. And another important factor is this idea of never again. And more in the modern world, people are standing up to various forms of racism, abuse, all different kinds of hate in certain ways. And I think that from the tragic experiences of the Holocaust really show us just how devastating it can be, and how important it is that we stand up when there are cases of injustice. And as a Jew in Hong Kong, I think there's a lot of really great systems for us to be able to go to in cases where we experience hate from different groups.
Great, thanks, Dan. Jin, do you want to say anything from Kuala Lumpur?
Yes. I want to say about education of Holocaust in Asia, Southeast Asia, right? So first of all, from my country, Malaysia, we didn't taught any history of Holocaust in high school. Yeah. So the first time I learned about history of Jews, learn about the history of Holocaust is in University of Macau. And so I think this important part that we all should learn in high school, and we all should learn in when we are studying, right? Not only university. So I think the education in Holocaust will help a lot in for us to remembering the past and to lead to a awareness of the history and not doing the same thing, same mistake in the future. So I think the education of Holocaust is very important and essential for the whole world, right? So I think, yeah, we should learn Holocaust because of this tragic history in the past, and we should prevent it happen again, the mistake occur again in the future. So this is my point of view, and thank you.
Thanks, Jin. Thanks, Jin. I'm going to use that point now to ask a question to Macau students, which I would then want Elsa, please do come in afterwards. We've talked, and Dan and Elsa made a very good point. He talked about exactly that feeling you have when you go to Israel, which I know very well what he means, and that pride one feels. On that point, something perhaps we don't talk about enough, and I want to ask my students here in Macau and then Elsa students, where we talk a lot about learning about the Holocaust, and we say never again. But of course, never again actually doesn't mean anything, because it's been happening again and again and again without cease since 1945, particularly, not exclusively, but certainly largely in many ways in Asia. And one thing we don't perhaps talk about enough from a Chinese point of view is the Nanjing Massacre. And not just the Nanjing Massacre, but everything that happened in China during the Japanese occupation, where it's Nanjing Massacre, when it's Unit 731, which was, the experimental place, rather like the experiments they performed at Auschwitz and Dachau and elsewhere. So I suppose the two things, what I'm asking is, if the Holocaust is important, is the Nanjing Massacre also important? And how do we try and teach both? And can they benefit from each other? Can teaching about the Holocaust improve our understanding of other genocides, and teaching about genocides in Asia, can that improve our understanding of the Holocaust? Can we establish a reciprocal relationship of understanding? Lenny.
Yes, yes, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think that Jing just make a very good point, that every nation, just like us Chinese and also Jews, we have a tragedy history, like our Nanjing Massacre and the Jewish Holocaust. So I remember that I didn't know any about the Jewish history until I go to university, but it's true that I first know about there is a Holocaust in history. When I was in a primary school, I was watching a documentary about the Holocaust history. I didn't know who is Jews. I didn't know what they are, but it's true that I have a feeling of sadness when I saw this, and it reminded me of our Nanjing Massacre. So I think that this emotion is equally connected with us and with the Jewish people. Yes.
Thank you. Felix?
Yeah, because in mainland China, we first come across the Holocaust is relatively late. We mainly focus on the Nanjing Massacre first. And as we all know, the December 13th is the National Memorial Day for the victims of the Nanjing Massacre. And from I entered the primary school, we hold many events such as watching the documentary and broadcasting the air defense warning. And in terms of a Holocaust, I found a similar Memorial Day. It's the Yom HaShoah in the April 7th. So I think, as I see it, people all over the world are using their unique but also similar ways to mourn and remember these victims who died and natural deaths, who died in disaster.
Esther, do you have anything to say?
Yes, I agree with their opinion. I think I know little about the Holocaust in high school. I only know that German did something to the Jews in the Second War, but only until university I know more about the Holocaust. But when I learned the Nanjing Massacre, so I can feel the feeling of the Jews. And so I think it is important to learn both the Holocaust and the Nanjing Massacre, so the feelings can connect to each other. Thank you.
There are always the majority and minority. Well, but the Holocaust is not just killing. I think the Holocaust is a kind of dehumanization, because Holocaust is just for killing, not for. Well, I think teaching Holocaust is to teach us to respect others, respect all the species, respect all the countries, and we do hope it will never happen again.
I'm going to pick up your point in a little while about dehumanization, which is a very important point. But I want to just stick with Nanjing and Holocaust for the moment. So I'm going to ask Elsa before. Let me ask Jin first. Jin, do you have anything to add to this particular bit before we go to Elsa?
So I think that besides Nanjing's massacre and Holocaust, there are also a lot of genocide, and not a lot, but some genocide in Southeast Asia, and some discrimination about minority in the society. So I think the education of this will help us in awareness of those discrimination in minorities of the society. So yes, this will raise human rights issues, and that we will want to learn about, and we want to respect each other, no matter who are they, where are they from, and what races are they, and we should learn to respect each other and more understanding each other. So not only from Holocaust and Nanjing, a lot of history, which including genocide or some discriminations, should be learned in the same time. So they have a close relationship about the value of learning it. Yeah. So I think we should learn them, and we should know why we want to learn it. Yeah. So this is my point. Thank you.
Thanks, Jin. Now I'm going to bring the conversation to Elsa, but I'm going to try and focus it a bit more. Everybody sitting in the Macao classroom, as it were, whether Malaysia or in Macau, has talked about the importance of the Holocaust, which I think is undeniable. I'm just wondering, and I'm just curious to know, at ELSA, given that you're living in China, do you learn about Nanjing and Chinese suffering? I mean, is that part of your education?
So since we were young, we've always learned about the Holocaust. And in our history classes, we've also been taught about the Nanjing Massacre. So I think that's been a really great way for us to feel a personal connection towards it while we're learning about it. And I think it's important for the whole world to be educated about all types of genocides, because only by being fully aware of what happened will we be able to make sure that it never happens again.
Great, that's brilliant. Because I have this fantasy, which is while COVID's around, it has to remain a fantasy. But I at some point, I would love to arrange to take a group of students from Macau and ideally a group of students from ELSA, you know, to take maybe to go to Shanghai and see the Jewish Refugees Museum in Shanghai, and have Jewish students take Chinese students around that, and then have Chinese students take Jewish students around around Nanjing. And I would hope at some point in the future, I would love my students to be able to maybe at some point join a trip to Poland. I mean, that's certainly my fantasy, is to get local students to go to Poland, which I know ELSA students do. And so what I'm really looking to discuss and encourage, I suppose, is to find ways that we can actually not merely talk about the importance of this, but actually begin to put into practice some idea about how we actually share common memory, and how we can actually make each other more understanding of each other's histories, and why the Holocaust is so important to a Jew, which it is. It's intrinsic to one's Jewish identity. But at the same time, I think to understand how other atrocities are intrinsic to other people's identities. A number of points. So first, great point. Other points on that from Elsa before I move on?
So I actually found the points about comparing the Nanjing Massacre and the Holocaust really interesting, because I'm Jewish, but I'm also half Chinese, and I actually didn't learn about the Nanjing Massacre until this year. And despite its effect on my family, which I learned after I talked to my mom for a while, but the whole point about learning about these types of things is we can see how othering has an effect on society. And as you were about to go into later, without this knowledge, it can happen again and again and again. And we can draw parallels between each genocide that happens as it occurs.
And I was just going to talk about, oh yeah. I was just gonna talk a bit about what we learned when we were studying the Nanjing Massacre and the Holocaust, and we were learning about why people do such violent things. And I think that that's a really important question to understand, because as a child, I always struggled with the question of how could someone do such a terrible thing to someone else. And I think that studying the ways in which we can dehumanize other individuals and, as Natalie said, other them, I think answering the fundamentals of that question allows us to have a much deeper understanding of the Holocaust.
Great, thanks. And see, what you're saying and what I think Lamola and Jin and other people said, I was trying to bring this on to something we more want to talk about, is dehumanization, which is in many ways an essential part of the genocidal process. You dehumanize people in order to make their killing easier and generally more acceptable. And something and this is why I think this can be very interesting. This is why I think Jews can really share their knowledge and their experience of what it is to be a minority, because we're very aware of ourselves as a Jewish diaspora. Perhaps we think less about the Chinese diaspora. And it is a fact that Chinese in countries like Indonesia in the 1960s, in Malaysia, in Thailand, in Philippines and elsewhere, have actually suffered tremendous discrimination. Partly because, again, like Jews, they're often a very successful minority. The Jews tend to be successful minorities, and that leads to resentment. And I think you get a similar thing in parts of Southeast Asia, where Chinese are seen as a very successful minority, but there's an emphasis on their minority status, and then there's discrimination. And I really feel this is somewhere where the Jewish experience could be very helpful in showing people who are now experiencing that, how they might deal with it, how they might confront it. And just on that point, let's not forget, at the moment, for the last 18 months, and ever since this wretched COVID, there has been an increase in anti-Asian sentiment in the United States, in Europe and elsewhere. One knows more and more more and more stories of how Asians are being discriminated against and abused and sometimes violently attacked. And this, of course, is something Jews have experienced for 2,000 years. So again, I wondered if anybody wants to talk about minorities, what it is to be a minority. Obviously, the Chinese in my class are not minorities. Jin in Malaysia is a minority. They come from a very large country called China. No minority there. But Jin is a minority in Malaysia. He's Chinese. And I'm just curious to know what let's talk about dehumanization and minorities and how we can use Holocaust education and genocide education on these issues.
I would like to say something about the dehumanization. I think the Holocaust is a history of dehumanization, and that's why we should educate it to children all over the world. Why? Because that it is an education of teaching the children how to be a human being, how to respect the others as equal human beings. And but there is also a danger of education during the Holocaust education. That is some real skins, the documentary of the Holocaust. It seemed really brutal, and the screens is not so possible to show to the children, especially the young children. So that's why I think it's very important to fictionalize the Holocaust education.
Wow.
Yes, so maybe to advocate it through the films, the movies, and even the literature. For example, we just watched a lot of Holocaust movie. Thanks to the Professor Glenn, we have this opportunity. So like the movie of Goodbye, Children, I think it is really a good movie to tell this cold story in a warm way. So maybe Felix, you'd like to share something about this movie, this dehumanization education to us.
Yeah, this movie is a wonderful movie. I like it very much because this movie, this method is use a more shocking method to show the Holocaust and the background. Because at first glance, it seems so peace and like a daily life that has nothing to do with the era, the World War II era. But the few details and conflicts appear from time to time. The fairly revealed the wartime cruelty. So I think this method is a more shocking method. So I prefer this movie.
So that's a very interesting point. That's come a bit of a shock to me. They hadn't told me they were going to say that at all. I'm not sure how I feel about fictionalizing all Holocaust through literature, even though I teach it. But certainly, I'd be interested to know what you think, because when I show documentaries, I know some of the students find it too graphic. And in a sense, it rather loses the message. It just becomes a horror show. And so maybe one needs to be more subtle in how one presents the Holocaust. Do you have any, I mean, this is part of the wider conversation, but I'm curious to know from Jin and from Elsa, any thoughts and responses to that? Anyone? Jin?
Well,
Okay, yeah, carry on. Yeah.
I was just thinking, I can't remember like a time where I wasn't not maybe actively taught about the Holocaust, but I can't remember a time where I didn't know what the Holocaust was, and maybe definitely not in all the graphic way, but the general idea of it and the general idea of the isolation of these people and dehumanization. So I think that definitely seeing how bad the Holocaust was, maybe not as children, but as you get older, it's important in order to gain that sort of the idea of how, in order to understand how terrible it was. But I definitely think that there are other ways that you can get the message of the dehumanization and of the horrors of the Holocaust without showing all the visually showing all the terrible things that went on.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I was surprised this year to this group of students. Unlike really in the past, they felt some of the more graphic documentaries were off-putting rather than enlightening. Whereas the film like Au revoir les enfants, I don't know whether you know the film, but it's a fantastic French film made in 1987. About, you know, the Holocaust actually impinges very subtly, and because the subtlety of it, it's such a powerful film. Jin, do you want to make any comments?
No, for now, but I want to share a bit details for Nanjing Massacre. Just we didn't talk more about it just now, but for all the audience who watching live, I want to share about the Nanjing is one mass killing and ravaging of Chinese citizens by soldiers of the Japanese Imperial Army after like on December 13, 1937. So this more details for those who not understand, who didn't learn Nanjing before. So this some extra ideas for me, yeah, so to share. Yeah.
Thanks, Jen. A very important point. So we should have thought about that. The Nanjing Massacre happened in 1937. It was shock news across the world in 1937 when the Japanese occupied Nanjing, which was then the Chinese capital. And Nanjing, I know there's certainly a feeling within China that the Holocaust in many ways has eclipsed the Nanjing, because the Holocaust then happens 3 years later and becomes the dominant narrative of genocide. And Nanjing, by strict rules, by strict interpretation, is not a genocide. It's an appalling massacre. But of course, it wasn't only in Nanjing that the Japanese behaved brutally. There was Unit 731, which I mentioned, which appalling experiments were done on people. There was the whole thing of comfort women, women who were used for sexual slavery, of whom a few are still alive, and for which there's never been adequate compensation. So there all sorts of atrocities took place in China during the war. And I know amongst Chinese, there's often a feeling that the world is not sufficiently aware of this. And that's why I think one way to advance Holocaust education is also to advance awareness of other people's atrocities and genocide, so people feel they have a shared stake in the story. I think that we need to create that idea that this story is common to all humanity, whether it's the Jews or the Chinese or the Rwandans or the Cambodians. It's actually important for all of us. Any points you want to make? No? Elsa, do you want to say more about dehumanization? I know that was something we were going to talk about more.
Yeah, sure. So I was just going to go back to the point before for a second. I think an important note in Holocaust education is that as sad and terrible as it all is, we should also devote part of the education to the good things that have happened, in the sense that we've learned a lot as individuals, and we're now kind of the things that are happening in the state of Israel and things like this call, like we're, as a global society, we're very tolerant. So we are kind of, when learning about the Holocaust, I think that it's important that we don't look at things all bad. And I think in the last few months, in studying the Holocaust much more in school, it really gets to you emotionally at some point. And one of the big turning point shifts for me was when we watched a movie about Eichmann, and how he was found by the Mossad and brought to trial in Israel. And I think that brought a lot of pride to me, because it showed me that people who perpetrate such things, who do such terrible acts, even if they're such powerful people, no one will ultimately escape a proper justice system.
No, thanks for that. I mean, I know exactly what you're saying, because I always try to end the Holocaust course precisely with the story of Eichmann's capture, because to me it makes one very proud. It makes one, and it's a way to end it with a sense of not restitution, but at least a sense of an attempt to restore the balance that evil has not been eliminated, but it has been recognized, and we've tried to punish it. And of course, the other very important thing I think about the Holocaust, I want to use the word positives, because there aren't any positives, but are the stories of the righteous among the nations. I mean, to me, they are the most remarkable people who risk their lives to save the lives of complete strangers is something which has to be inspiring for all of us. And I really think when we teach the Holocaust, we need to also teach much more about the righteous, how they, how complete strangers saved people at great, great danger to themselves. That is immensely important. Time is running on, so any final comments from Macao? Clemona, you've been awfully quiet, as has Esther.
Yeah, and I just want to talk something about the dehumanizations. And we all know the ghetto. And people in there are lack of food, and there are hunger, and the cumulative impacts finally destroyed many people. So, dehumanizations is.
Yeah, I think that Colomena's point is that the tragedy stories of the ghettos, of the whole Holocaust, and all the genocide in the world, it really can touch us. And I think that to make a final comment, yes, the Holocaust education, what is the point? So what should we teach to the public or to the children? I think it's to teach the people to be kind. And that's why, like Professor said, it's really important to introduce the rightness stories to the public. Yes, and also as the final performance, the music performance, I would like to have a brief introduction. That is come from a movie about the Nanjing Massacre. So I see that someone is really interested about what is Nanjing Massacre. Maybe someone didn't know. After listening to our music, maybe you can find out the movie and know more. I think it's called The Beauties in the War. Yes.
Flowers.
Yes.
Flowers.
The flowers in the war. Sorry.
Yes, just going back to Clemona's point, I think it was interesting in teaching the course this semester, how some of the students, I think, were actually more moved, more shocked, more horrified, more disgusted by the footage and imagery from the Warsaw Ghetto than they were from hearing about the gas chambers. But I suppose that is something one can relate to. One can imagine oneself starving on the street in Warsaw. I'm not sure, but it's interesting how profoundly the students were affected by the Warsaw Ghetto in the whole course. Jim, any final thoughts?
Glenn, can you turn your microphone back on when you get a chance on the next time around?
So whatever I said was not heard. Never mind.
We heard you, Glenn. Just it was a little bit more faint. So now you'll have it on. Great. But over to you, Jin.
Yes. Hi.
Anything you want to say before we wrap up?
Yes, I want to point out one point about how to stop. How do we prevent the same thing happen in the future? Like, how do we stop discriminating? How do we learn to respect each other as a Malaysians, which a lot of races in my country, right? We always try to live harmony in the country. So what can I say is, like, we need to try to understanding each other's, no matter where are they from, who are they, right? No matter what races are them, right? So we need to do our best in understanding their backstory, in understanding their culture, and learn to respect. So like we have a lot of social issues for now. We have Black Lives Matter, Stop Asian Hate, and back in the day, the discrimination of Jews is so terrible. And I think that we should stop by more understanding each other to learn the culture, to understanding all of us is just normal human being that won't harm each other. And with the respect, we can stop discriminating and we can prevent maybe genocide or those dehumanizations in the future. And with all efforts together, with all the understanding together, we can make the future better. So this my point of view. Yeah. So thank you.
Great, Jin. Okay, we're going to stop for the moment there, and I'm going to invite our students here in Macau, please, to light a candle and make a dedication. 4 candles, 4 dedication. Put your candles up. We want to end with some memorial aspect. With some memorial aspect. And so Lenny will light the first candle and then read the dedication for this candle.
This candle is dedicated to the eternal memory of the 6 million Jews murdered in Europe during the Holocaust. May their suffering compel us to make the world a better place for all.
Thank you. Felix.
This candle is dedicated to the eternal memory of who suffered and died during the Nanjing Massacre. The victims so cruelly murdered in Unit 731 in Harbin, and all the victims of the Japanese occupation of China from 1931 to 1945.
Thank you, Felix. Esther, would you do your dedication, please? See, people don't smoke anymore. No one has to know. People don't know how to light a match.
This candle is dedicated to the memory of the countless victims of genocide in all parts of the world, and to all those who suffer today as those in positions of power still stand by doing nothing to stop these crimes.
And finally, Clamola, will you read your dedication? And if you need help lighting the match, let me know.
This candle is dedicated to those who work so tirelessly to make the world a better place for all. For those who sacrifice their comfort and safety in their struggle to shine a light on the suffering of others. May we be privileged to be counted among their number in months and years ahead.
Thank you very much, Clamola. I'm going to ask, we're running out of time, and I'm going to ask Jin if he'll read a pledge from the on behalf of the students at the University of Macau.
We, who are students at the University of Macau, preparing to enter adult life after our studies, today pledge that we will endeavor to do better than the generations that precede us, and that we will try our best to make never again mean precisely that. Though we are few and without power, we will try to create a world in which respect, empathy, and compassion will prevail.
Thank you so much. And can we have, I think it was Natalie, is it from Elsa, who's going to read the pledge from Elsa?
We, students at Elsa High School in Hong Kong, aware of our Jewish heritage, in which we take enormous pride, pledge that we will use the history of our people, not least the imaginable suffering of the Shoah, to help others also understand the pain and torture of their own histories, and that while they can learn from us, we can in turn learn from them too. We together will work towards making a world in which chesed and tikkun, compassion and healing, will be our watchwords, and respect for our ultimate endeavor.
Elsa, thank you very, very much for your fantastic contribution. I do mean it that I would love to organize a joint tour, perhaps to Shanghai and Nanjing when it's possible, COVID, etc. And maybe some of our students go to Poland at some point. To all of you, my warmest thanks to my Macao group. Wonderful, thank you very much to Jin. And now we'd just like to end with a piece of music. We started with the melody from Hannah Sanesh. This is a piece of music to evoke a memory of the Nanjing Massacre. From the Hong Kong Holocaust Tolerance Center. Everyone a stimulating, thoughtful day ahead. And we're very privileged to have been part of this extraordinarily important event. Thank you, and goodbye from all of us.